Let me move on to Mr. Mohamed Hussein. We heard the experience of Nigeria and what is happening there. We heard the experience in Egypt. Again, practical examples on the ground. Please share with us your experience on more from Africa, from the rest of Africa, on practical on the ground solutions for what we are observing as the horrible impact on the farmers, especially the small ones.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the colleague who spoke before me, Dr. Mashan Baravin, because that is what I'm going to present is what's happening in East Africa. And East Africa is one of the areas that is severely affected by climate change, as reflected in the repeated droughts and flash flood that wash everything. So they developed in 2011, they developed Drought Disaster Resilience Sustainability Initiative. And that is a comprehensive integrated initiative. We have like 7 pillars: the natural resources, the environment management, market access, trade and financial services, enhance production and livelihood diversification, disaster risk management, research, knowledge management and technology transfer, peace building, conflict prevention and resolution, coordination and institutional strengthening and partnership. Based on this umbrella initiative, there is a lot of intervention and a lot of funding from different donors through different agencies and to the government in the member state of IGAD, particularly for Ethiopia, for Kenya, for Djibouti, for Uganda, recently for Somalia. Most of the intervention are looking at the issue of agropastoral livelihoods support, because pastoral and agropastoral is the mobile community in the region. So with their mobility, they make a lot of what we call localized conflict and competition over the natural resources, the limited natural resources available, as mentioned by my colleague. Sutu. But to address the livelihood issues and resilience of those communities, it's very important to do some management for the natural resources and to improve the market access and trade and the livelihood support, and address any of the potential risks that may appear, like a contingency planning. For this, when we speak about natural resource management, the number one is the water. We have a lot of water coming during the rainy season through seasonal streams and hores. Sometimes it's causing floods, other times it is shortage. So there is a lot of soil degradation because of what is happening with the climate change. And with this, the intervention, the current intervention in those member states is how to conserve more water. Number one, either by water collection points or creating small soil dikes and small dams. And by doing so, you are improving the underground water table. Particularly if you have a cycle of drought that continue for 3 years, if you have a good underground reservoir, then you can still exist in your place and you don't migrate. For the others, and this also include like the natural vegetation, particularly trees. And maybe the one Masha can or Sutu can pick that forest is the one who is providing the feeding during the dry season for livestock. And usually those pastoral community, they refer back to the forest in their area to have some feed from the falling leaves of the trees and the shade from the trees that protects them from the severe heat. So the forest is one of the important components together with water, but the most important one, because you remember at the beginning, maybe some people did not attend the first part of it, is the issue of migration and displacement and refugees. Particularly, we are trying to help people to stay in their areas. And to stay in their areas, you have to build the different infrastructure that is needed and try to provide the basic social services that people survive on it, like education, health, access, market access, etc. So we have an infrastructure of road improvement, particularly market access roads, and we have basic education services, and we have health services, primary health services, etc. For the credit, also are facing a problem with the banking system. So some of the countries, they release some policies regarding mobile system for finance, and that help. For the cooperatives, the cooperative legislation is still lacking behind, and we need to work on the legal issues to improve the cooperative structures. All of the intervention we are doing in IGAD country is a community-driven development approach. We have to mobilize the community about the potential they have in their areas, and then they select the priority interventions they needed. And like now, we have a 500 million for Uganda, 400 for Ethiopia, 100 million, 300 for Kenya, and 80 million for Djibouti. But the area that we are assisting, it is borderland areas most of the time. So it is far away from the capital. We have poor infrastructure to outreach, but people are surviving there, and we are trying to develop their livelihood, diversify their income, and protect their children from going illiterate. Because one of the major issues about those areas in rural areas is illiteracy. And with illiteracy, you have a lot of manipulation for conflict and dispute, etc. I can stop here.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. You talked about the borderland areas as the ones that are receiving the most support. How much do you think? How much more is needed to really protect Africa as a whole? Those people in specific, because those, I mean, so small farmers are vulnerable. The ones on the border areas are even more vulnerable. So this is as vulnerable as it gets. How much more would be needed in order to support them, really? Because we're talking about micro. These are all micro attempts, not micro, but I mean limited, okay, by the program. But given how, given how huge the population of Africa is, and how vulnerable those groups in specific are, how much do you perceive would be needed in order to give protection for Africa, for those people in specific, not just the ones that you have in mind, or the ones that you are adopting? From your experience, how much more would be needed if we are to scale it up to Africa?
It is going to be huge, because like for the infrastructure, because I said it is a border area, it is far away from the capital. They did not receive any of the they are marginalized. You can say they did not receive of basic services before, of education, health, water, etc. Like now, out of the limited budget I mentioned, almost like 45% of it is going for developing of those infrastructure, which is going to be helpful. But the good thing about it, because it is not top-down approach, it is bottom-up approach, that the community is contributing for maintenance and operation of those services. And this is very helpful, because if you depend on the central government, at certain level, they say, oh, we have limited budget, we cannot do. But now, with the community engagement and ownership and empowerment, I think those services can continue. So the 40% or 45% I mentioned is just for 4 countries. But if you look at the potential conflict areas between farmers and Basra and borderland areas in Africa, it is huge. So we will need a lot. We can do calculation for that and have initial estimate if I coordinate with Thutu, because he has a big picture of the disputes, potential disputes.
Well, we'll move to Soto right away. Back to you, Soto, and the conflicts, okay? And the conflicts. You mentioned the conflicts, and it is actually this issue. Conflicts, migration, borderline people, these are small farmers that are even more vulnerable than the others, okay? And the competition over limited resources is taking us back to hundreds of years ago. I mean, it's like you're talking about back in history, in the 1800s, when people were killing each other, fighting over resources. This is what we're living in. It's very scary. I want you to tell me what you suggest as solutions to the problem, as seen in your country from what you know so far, and then we'll move on to another topic quickly. But go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abla. I will be quick. This, as I had mentioned, it's not that new in terms of problem or challenge, but its nexus with climate change is something that we just begin to understand. And I would specifically, as we had discussed, we want this webinar to be focused on the solutions. So I want to share a specific one, which is being put into experience by the government of Benin. We don't know yet if it is the solution, but it's the beginning of the solution to solve that issue of conflict between farmers and pastoralists. In 2021, so last year, the president has appointed the High Commissioner for the Sedentarization of Pastoralists. It's a bit conflicting even in the concept to talk about the sedentarization of pastoralists, because pastoralists by nature, they are nomadic people. Transhumance is a mode of living. So there has been a lot of very intense discussions around if it would be possible to get those pastoralists to stay in the same location. And when my think tank was looking at the issue for the government, just to mention, we have a help desk where we support government with evidence and research findings when they want to make important decisions. So we work on the topic, and what we noticed from the field is that those people that we call pastoralists, so nomadic communities, in fact, they were in some areas of Benin for the last 70 years. So we keep calling them nomadic people or people who have transhumance as a mode of living, but for the last 50 or 70 years, we have many communities of them who have been staying in the same area. So that was one of the key arguments for pushing for those communities to stay in a very fixed area, and then reduce the migration from one area to another one. And the government has, in addition to that political position, they also have launched, with the support of the West African Development Bank, a very large program, which is called the Program for Specialization of Pastoralists. And what are they basically doing currently? The program has three components. The first one is to do a kind of mapping of the natural resources and the areas that have the potential to host those pastoralists. So they are creating what we call in French, campement peul. So it's a delimited area for pastoralists. It's very big, very large area, but the understanding is that they will stay in that, in the borders of that specific area. And for them to have access to the resources, the government is now concentrating very large investments to make sure that they have they can produce food for the cattle. They can have access to water. So there have been a number of infrastructure that the government is building now to try to recreate the natural environment or the natural resources that they were looking for when they migrate from an area to another one. The second component of the program is the investment in basic social services. One important point is that when we talk about climate change impacts on the farmers, on the herders, on fishermen, one important point is also that you can't adapt well to climate change while you still have some basic socioeconomic challenges. Access to basic social services such as education, health, access to water, access to transportation services. So the government is also concentrating a number of social investment in those areas so that the communities can find the place as a good one to stay. And the third component is on the investment in soft capacities. The second component, as I had mentioned, is we can call it a hard investment. But hard investment is not something that is very beneficial if you don't support it with some soft investment. And in terms of soft investment, they are looking at two specific aspects. The first one is capacity building. So helping, for example, the farmers to have access to innovations, to have good cropping techniques, support the pastoralists to, for example, to handle diseases of the cattle. So a whole program of capacity building, mainly through agricultural advisory systems. The second important soft investment is on social cohesion. Those conflicts that we also mentioned emerge because there is a disruption in the social cohesion of those communities. So there have been some activities for reinforcing social cohesion from three dimensions. The first one is social cohesion within one community. The second one is the social cohesion between one community and another one. So inter-community social cohesion. The first one is the intra-community social cohesion. And the third one is the relationship between the state and the communities, which is also one of the key driver of all those conflicts. We have some areas in Benin which, territorially speaking, they are part of Benin, but when you visit the country, they are actually living in Nigeria. They use Nigeria currency, they go to Nigeria school. If they have problem, they are referring to Nigeria police. So there is a disconnect between the government and the local communities. And all those issues are fueling conflict in the on the ground. So combining those different components, we are now reaching a point where we could argue for a holistic solution. We should not be only looking at what are the innovations for climate change adaptation. We should also be aware that those innovations involve in a political economy. They involve in an environment which encompasses many other elements. So that's what the government is currently trying to do. The theory of change behind that is that reducing the migration or reducing the movement of the pastoralists will reduce the number of conflicts. And before I conclude on that, I want to mention that this policy that the government of Benin is trying to push will also be successful if it can have an echo at the regional level. Because the conflicts between farmers and pastoralists is, of course, something that could be treated internally within the country, but it is a regional issue. If you cannot limit pastoralists living, Nigeria to Niger or coming from Nigeria to Benin, and you are just handling the Benin case, it will not be very much effective in the long term. So the solution should also be a regionally and spatially coordinated solution so that the spillover effects are reduced from one region to another one. So I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think these are extremely very, very important point, especially the regional dimension. If it's happening within only one country, okay, it might solve the problem partially, but then regionally is the way to approach it, right? And it is a serious problem, and it will increase and becoming more serious with the climate change and with the horrible situation that we are facing. Let me move on to one of the most sensitive issues, which is the governments really, and the sort of the precondition of success for any of this. Okay, we are talking about attempts that are taking place in different countries. We are talking about some success stories. Those success stories can happen if the ones in charge of them are left free to act as they see scientifically appropriate with the work with the communities and achieve. Is this always happening, or are there issues with the governments? And if so, how are they handled? Because government's agricultural policy is at the heart of all this. And if it doesn't change and it doesn't adapt itself to the disastrous situation that Dr. Adel described at the beginning, then we are really doomed. We are doomed, that we'll be even doomed further. So let's go to our success stories. Mr. Masha, your Nigerian experience for 11 years, how supportive was the government in this whole thing? What were the problems? How did you get over it? Did you manage to educate the government based on the success story that they need to look at things differently? What?
So I'd say that the government actually has been quite helpful. I think in the very early days of Babangona, when Babangona was more of an idea, the then Minister of Agriculture, who's now the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Aki Adesina, was personally very helpful in helping us think through the initial strategy. And then we then were able to work with some of the folks within the Central Bank of Nigeria to support some of our work in the early days. I think there are still areas, I think, for opportunity for improvement in how the governments typically work. I think oftentimes, the government actively tries to play the role of the private sector versus encourage the investment by the private sector. And oftentimes what that creates is a scenario where the government actually crowds out the private sector. I think an example would be if you look at the two major agricultural sectors in Nigeria, the three: seed, herbicides or chemicals, and then fertilizer. The one that is actually the largest relative to other parts of the world is actually the herbicides and other chemical spaces compared to seeds and fertilizer. And that's primarily because the government has actually not regulated that sector and really kind of stayed out of that sector. So it's been allowed to thrive and grow and so on and so forth. So I think that's the major challenge that we do tend to see.
Okay, so stay out. So, so then your advice to the government: stay out and let the private sector work.
Well, I would say it's not so much. Think about how your actions can stimulate. What impact would that action have on the private sector's willingness to invest? Right? Because at the end of the day, too often you see government initiatives that are basically using government funding, using government balance sheets to directly achieve a goal. But what I think is, at the end of the day, if the government could play a role to use its resources to crowd in the private sector, the impact will be significantly higher.
I agree completely. Couldn't agree more. Okay, Mr. Hussein, Mr. Mohamed Hussein, tell me.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think the importance of having the private sector is very essential, particularly if we are addressing the needs of small farmer, and we are saying the growing season is getting shorter. So we need a special type of seeds, of inputs. And the government cannot cover the huge needs of those areas affected by the climate change. So the private sector can come in. And the best approach maybe is the World Bank or other agencies working on public-private partnership approach. And that is very helpful, BPPs. We did it for the livestock sector, on vaccination of cattle, provision of veterinary services, etc., by private partners, and it worked very well. So they can do it also for agriculture. This is my contribution. Thank you.
Okay. The seeds that are adjustable or that are adjusted to the climate situation and help farmers produce crops that are, that can survive more and so on, what we talked about. Are they locally grown, or are they coming from, they have to be coming from the Western world, and this is why the World Bank and so on would be able to help? The question is still to you, Mr. Mohamed.
I have a good example because of the drought of 84-85 that hit the Sahel region. And at that time, we lost all the seed sources, particularly for the millet crop. So FAO helped the country and bringing short maturing varieties from Nigeria. Usually the crop takes like 90 days, and this short maturing variety coming from Nigeria takes like 50 to 60 days. After 10 years, I found it in Darfur, in Al-Fashir, and it is like 2 sacks in one of the farmer. So we start seed bulking as FAO. And now I think it is covering huge area in Darfur because of continuous drought spells they are receiving. So that is one of the example. It can be done by private sector better than like UN agencies, etc., because the needs is huge. And there is other varieties. The military just took it as an example.
Okay. Okay, so now, Mr. Praveen, I hope you had enough time to think about the issue of government and the government involvement. And you're working in Upper Egypt, which is an area of high interest to Egypt. What can be done to make the government help you more? Okay, how have they helped?
Yeah, okay.
What needs to be changed in the policies? Tell us a bit.
Okay, I will start with the will, and then I'll go move to the R. what we will do and what we are doing. No, but jokes aside, I think what is really needed is that governments really need to be enablers. I think your very first question, which you made to me, was, do farmers see governments as a problem? And I think that's the wrong question. I think governments need to be seen by farmers and by communities as enablers. And I think that's where governments will have the greatest leverage in enabling and permitting conditions that will avoid, as Kola said, in crowding out the private sector and others. They need to be enablers in providing the means by which people can move down to the ground. It can't stay in Cairo. It can't stay at that policy level. It's how to transition from that policy. I think there's a lot of work that's being done in policy, but how do we make that transition from policy down to the earth? In the financial institutions, for example, what we are doing is accompanying the financial institutions down to the ground. We are taking them to go see the program, to go see their client, because this is, I'm not sure that the financial markets really understand the size and the extent of this new client base that has been devoid from the marketplace. And so I think what we are doing is showing them that this client base exists, that it is viable if they have the right means to access. And so this is, as Kolam, I think, mentioned, and I think Mohamed and others mentioned, is what are the enablers? You know, is it the guarantees? Is it things that we can work around so that they can be the clients? In Egypt, one of the biggest issues around, as I'm being told, I've only been here a very short period of time, so I'm still in the learning phase. I hope you will all excuse me for that. But land is a big issue. And if that's what the banks ask for, a guarantee that the land to be as a thing, land titling here amongst the smaller and smaller and fragmented pieces of land start to be more and more questionable. So we need to find an alternative that will be sufficiently acceptable to the financial markets to accept the risks, and at the same time to the farmers and small farmers that will enable some of these policies to trickle down. So the distance between, we need to make sure that the distance between the policy and the actual, be it the government, the private sector, is really one that puts the client at the forefront. And it's not the money at the forefront, or it's not the interest at the forefront. It's how do we really understand the viability.
Thank you very much. This is useful. The issue with the financial institutions has always been a problem. I think it has always been a problem because they don't see, they are looking for title to be able to guarantee any project when they should, maybe the guarantee should come from the project itself. This is how you deal with the small ones. It's a different thing altogether. And governments are willing, but then between will and are, there is something a lot.
Exactly. And I think that we need to, well, maybe not only the projects, I think it needs to address, you know, what are possible alternatives as for collateral. And if land itself is going to be the only solution, I'm not too sure we're going to have very effective policies.
Internationally, what is used as collateral?
Yeah, well, there are many ways to look at collateral. Sometimes the financial institutions will look at cooperatives being the collateral, or the social group that is taking out the loan as being the collateral. So it is a shared risk, and there is a dynamics that exists in Colombia and Latin America, where we were working with financial institutions. It was the collectivity. So it was everybody in that 25 farmer group that was guaranteeing for the other. So there was peer pressure amongst the farmers to want to stay cohesive, but at the same time was a sufficient guarantee to pay back. And so I think the bottom line has to be, it can't be a one size fits all. It really needs to look at the individual areas. What may work in Upper Egypt may not work in the Delta. So I think we need to find those things, and I think we need to build trust. The trust issue is very, very large. Is it with the government? Is it with the enabler? Is the government providing that enabling support? So while the policy may be there, is that policy being trickled down in terms of the various services that exist? And if it is the private sector, then let's provide that incentive to that private sector to have that means to reach the people.
Trickling down of policies is a very serious issue. Dr. Adil, please. Unmute your friend. Unmute your doctor. Dr. Adil, please unmute.
And I think it's the issue here is boundaries. What is the role of the government in the agriculture sector? It's policy as well as research and extension work to provide knowledge, and the third one to build up institutions and to facilitate the work of the private sector, because even smallholder is a private sector. And therefore, this issue in 2014, we had changed the cooperative law in Egypt to allow smallholders to get together and they form a company. And with this company, they don't need collateral. They can come as a cooperative and they can have money from open banks. It's not only the Agricultural Credit Bank, but Al-Ahli or other banks. And then they take loans according to a program. And we have done this especially as well to facilitate that the group of young people in the Delta who would like to work on big companies, and they work in big areas like 10,000 acres or so, if they have a program like this, they can submit it, they can take credit from the banks for them to start their work in the newly reclaimed area. But this issue does not only, it helps as well cooperative inside the Delta, because there is a lot of good examples. There is a Shams program, which was in Upper Egypt, which is wonderful because it overcomes the fragmentation. It brings small pieces of land together, and then they do the marketing together. They put the same crop in the field, and they market collectively. And this optimizes water use efficiency as well as increase in the market chain, because they have their own packing houses, they have their own distribution, and they're still working. There's another program which was with UNDP called Salasil, and it was a success. It's a matter of only how we scale up all this. But legislation is very important. That's why we change the legislation for cooperative, as well as contracting farming. We didn't have a law in Egypt for contracting farmer, and now you have a law which really help the farmers as well as the people who contract with them to buy their product in this context. I think I will stop here because there is a lot to say here. One dimension which I would like to say, because we are closer now to the end of this wonderful meeting, thanks to Dr. Abla Abdulatif. The issue here is a time frame for all of us in Africa and in the world. What we are going to do, but when? Because the time is running and it's dynamic impact. The risk is dynamic. The risk of yesterday is not the risk of tomorrow or next year or the year after. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aida. Thank you, and actually very, very powerful. And it is the time; it's the urgency. Dr. Soto, back to you. The government needs to do a lot of things, okay? And it's busy with everyday operation and so on. What can, how can agricultural policy be improved with the think tanks, like your kind of think tank? a couple of minutes. Go ahead, please. Then unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
A lot has been said about the government. I think I totally agree that government should play its facilitation role. In some countries, we tend to see, even in Benin, that government is taking some private sector role. Having even businesses in the agricultural sector, I think is not something that should be done. But let me just say a few words on how the government is making agricultural policies, including how they decide on climate change adaptation. And I think there should be a better linkage between the research production world, so the think tanks, the universities. You would see that since we were talking, you would see that there is a lot of knowledge outside there. There has been a lot of studies, research done on climate change adaptation. So we know a lot, but sometimes you don't see that knowledge being used to inform the decision-making process. So I think it should be one of the priority while we are talking about climate adaptation and support to government is to increase our capacity for evidence synthesis. So try to start compiling everything we know. What are the climate change adaptation options that are working? What are the determinants of the success of those options? What are even the indigenous knowledge that the farmers, the small communities are already using in their own farms, which at some point are providing a solution to the climate change problem. So first, we need to increase that capacity of evidence synthesis. And then we also need to improve the format. The research community, especially at the university, colleagues mostly tend to do research for academic purposes or for publications only. We should also be doing more new, meaningful research to make sure that everything that we are investing funds to research on would have a direct application either in policy or in practice. The other point regarding government and the relationship with the research community is also how we make sure that they have access to that evidence. One thing that we are piloting in Benin is what we call the help desk, which is a kind of small office that any decision maker can call and ask maybe for information, for data, or for research finding that they would want to use to make a decision. So just in a nutshell, I think it's important for the government to continue playing that facilitation role, to continue creating the ecosystem and the environment for scaling up all those very good solutions and innovation that we are seeing for climate change adaptation. And then finally, make sure that they make use of all the knowledge that is available so that we don't just reinvent the wheel and we learn from what has been done in the past or in other countries.
Absolutely. We need to benefit from the available capabilities and be willing, because there is no time. I want to give, as we approach our end, I've already promised Mr. Hazem Ibrahim to say a few words. So please, in a minute or so, please give us the headlines of what you have in mind. Mr. Hazem.
Good morning and good afternoon. And thank you, Dr. Abla, for the opportunity. And sorry for joining you a bit casual. I'm here in Egypt on a vacation, actually. That's why.
No, it's fine. Enjoy your vacation, but tell us quickly what you have in mind.
Okay, so actually, I'm with the World Bank based in Africa, in Zambia. And also, it's my background, and I've been in that sector for many years. And key issues that I have seen as concerns to the small-scale farmers are access to markets, access to finance, and access to technology. Access to finance in Egypt is one of the challenges, and that was even the topic of my thesis for the doctorate. We have a serious issue in facilitating access to finance to farmers in Egypt, to small-scale farmers. Financial institutions do not have the appetite to provide finance to them. At the same time, access to markets is a challenge. So I believe one of the key areas that can be looked into is using potential contracts with large off-takers as one of the collaterals for facilitating access to finance and ensuring that banks have the appetite and the ability to provide finance. Very quickly back on to the point on impact on climate change, if you allow me, because that's a key issue that is being seen, especially in many of the countries that are rain-fed agriculture. The impact is obvious and significant. The impact on productivity, on farmers' income is huge. And use of technology is starting to boom in, actually, and be utilized. One last point that I think we are still missing in Egypt, and I can see it already implemented in many places in Africa, is agriculture finance. We do not have access to agriculture finance, agriculture insurance in Egypt. That's a key point that need to be looked into. Insurance service providers need to consider providing it to farmers. I know that we have the fund for livestock, but we need to work on it for agriculture production.
I need from you, if I may, because I need to have the other two speakers, each one for 1 minute. Send us in writing, please, what you have seen in Africa happening on the insurance in particular, so that we can add it as suggestion. Ms. Nada? Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Nada?
Yes.
In 1 minute, please. Yes,
in less than a minute. Hi, everyone. My name is Nada Dia. I'm a communication officer at the International Committee of the Red Cross. I've been curiously following. So the ICRC has been adopting, especially with the approach of COP27, raising the awareness of the importance of financing climate financing and supporting initiatives that stands against climate change. I just have a very quick question to Dr. Adel. He was just mentioning about these two programs, one called Shams and the other was called Salasil in Upper Egypt. And I wanted to ask him if I would want to know more or reach out to any of the farmers or the people who are responsible for these programs. So how would I reach up to them? Thank you so much for all of you for the very enriched conversation that you've enlightened my world with for the past 2 hours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have somebody else had the hand raised. Ismail something, lead researcher, but I think, I don't know what happened. I don't know. He disappeared from my screen, but if he's there, you can ask your question or make your comment. I don't think he's here. Yeah, okay, Dr. Adel, please very quickly answer her comment. Thank you. Unmute يا دكتور. Unmute يا دكتور والنبي. Unmute.
I do. We issued for the insurance, we issued in 2015 the first law to insure the farmer from risk. And this has been endorsed by the parliament, and now it's law. It's a matter of implementation, and it could be implemented. As far as information, any information needed for this other things, I can send it to Dr. Abla, and she can send it to Ms. Nada for information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to have a document that's wrapping up the key recommendations for improvement and the urgency of things, and we're circulated by you, again, including Dr. Adil, in order to make sure that we are very precise in what we do and we didn't miss anything. But before I end, in 30 seconds each, if you are asked what is the action that needs to be taken now, if we are to save those farmers in Africa, what would that action be? And I will start with Mr. Masha. 30 seconds. The others are at an advantage because they have a chance to think, but you don't have. Go ahead.
Wonderful, thank you. So at the core of the farmer's ability to be resilient and increase their economics is access to financing. So being able to ensure that we're able to create the systems and structures, be it government guarantees, be it other impact investors channeling debt financing to organizations supporting smallholder farmers. You're not going to get very far unless the farmers have money to invest in the technology to be more resilient, to play a role in mitigating for climate change and dramatically improve their lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir Praveen, 30 seconds. Unmute.
Yeah, I guess that's the part where I would have liked to come in first. I would have said the same thing. But having said that, I think the single most, in addition to access to finance, I really believe if I have the floor, is to really push forward on digitalization and innovation to put knowledge and awareness in the hands of the farmers so they can see what is out there and what is available to them. And the second most important thing is to start building. It's not just agriculture, it's also building that value chain so they can see themselves along for where it's going, how it's going, and what they knew. And that will improve also the quality of their products and diversity.
Thank you. Dr. Soto, 30 seconds, unmute.
Thank you. Yes, just two, I would say two priorities. The first one for me is to make sure that they have access to resources. When I say resources, it's financial resources, but it can also be natural resources to adapt to the emerging climate change. And the second one is that we should focus also on a holistic solution. Not only climate change adaptation, but its other interrelationships with the other sectors, education, social services, so that we see it as a holistic solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hussein, you're the lucky one. The last one, and Dr. Adil is after you because he's our guest today, so he has the privilege of being the very last one. Mr. Hussein, 30 seconds, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at basic infrastructure, and particularly with the climate change, I'm looking for energy and water and soil conservation. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Adil.
I really do think that in order to have a safety net against the climate change impact, it's an integrated safety net which has a melange of policy, as well as knowledge, as well as credit, as well as educating governments. This is the awareness not for the public only, but for the government official. Therefore, they can not hide the danger for the communities. People has lived on this planet for thousands of years, and they have the resilience to stay on, but they have to have the knowledge of the danger coming. Therefore, they can accept the solution and work with the government and work with the communities to have a solution. Thank you.
Absolutely. Notice that everything you said actually goes back to governments acting, doing their job, building the infrastructure, providing the access, facilitating life for the farmers, and allowing those who know to access and do their work instead of crowding them out or blocking them. Okay. Thank you so much. This was an incredible session. I really thank you so much. All the speaker, Mr. Praveen Agrawal, Dr. Regis Toto, Mr. Mohamed Osman, and Mr. Kola Masha. And special thanks to Dr. Adil El-Bultagi, who spared 2 hours of his time to join us. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And Dr. Yasmin's contribution. As I said, we'll put the recommendations in a very concise document, and I will pass it by all of you so that you can add points or adjust the words in the best possible way. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Actually, it's going to be on the 6th of September, and it's going to be on the carbon market. Everything is related, okay? But the reason we are dividing them into pieces so that we have enough time for the brainstorming. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I thank the participants and the audience, and I'm waiting for what Mr. Hazem is going to send me on the experience in Africa. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.